Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to dive into, or should I say, we're going to dive back into the fascinating and even complex world of catch-up sleep. This is one of those hot off the press episodes. Hot off the press episodes are where we explore the latest, greatest, and most striking new sleep science. This one is fascinating, I promise. Even potentially promising, which is, it's a rare thing for me to be promising when I'm speaking about sleep, I know. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you'll know that the recommended sleep duration for adults is between 7 to 9 hours each night. And that's according to the CDC and other health organizations. And notice the emphasis on the word each night, because for many of us, that nightly sleep target is often elusive, especially during the week. And it is so understandable. So understandable. You add up the factors of work, family obligations, weekday stress, and as a result, we will often then try to make up, quote unquote, for lost sleep at the weekend. This behavior, where we short sleep during the week and then we sleep longer on the weekend, is an incredibly widespread phenomenon if you look across industrialized nations. And again, I am not trying to wag any fingers. I so understand it. We're all trying to balance our responsibilities with all of the biological needs, of course, that we have of sleep. But the big question is this: does this weekend catch-up sleep, can it truly sort of pay off the sleep debt we accumulated during the week? And can we pay down that debt every weekend without consequence? And if anything, can it act as some kind of saving grace to de-risk what would otherwise happen if we just continued to sleep short nightly manner at the weekends, just as we do during the week? Some years ago, to explore this, there was a fantastic study that I think I've covered before on this podcast very briefly by Dr. Ken Wright at the University of Colorado Boulder. I need to interview Ken. He is just spectacular. And it was a very tightly controlled study. It didn't necessarily involve vast numbers of individuals, but because it was so precise, its power, its sort of scientific rigor and precision is that much more, I think, validating in the results. And it involved 36 healthy adults who spent nearly 2 weeks straight in a sleep laboratory, highly controlled. The participants were divided into essentially 3 groups. Group 1 was allowed 9 hours of sleep opportunity in bed every night for 9 nights of those 2 weeks. Group number 2, they were restricted to 5 hours of time in bed for 9 of those nights. Group 3 was a little different. They too were restricted to 5 hours of sleep a night, but then they were given 2 nights of unrestricted recovery sleep. So in other words, they were providing this 5 hours of sleep a night for a similar weekday period, and then they were given these 2 weekend-like nights to get all of the recovery sleep that they wanted. So we've got group 1, that's the control group, 9 hours of time in bed every night. Group number 2, restricted to 5 hours of sleep. Group number 3, 5 hours of sleep each night. But then after 5 nights, they were given these 2 nights of unrestricted recovery sleep, rather than group 2, who just kept on being given only 5 hours in bed each night. So in other words, group 3 was designed to mimic the typical societal pattern of short sleep during the week, followed by weekend recovery sleep. And what was great about the study is that they assessed various health outcomes, including changes in circadian rhythm, changes in food consumption, changes in body weight, and also changes in blood sugar regulation. Specifically, they were looking at something called insulin sensitivity, which helps us get a really good microscopic view of exactly what's happening with your blood sugar regulation. So what did they find? A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled LMNT. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte mix. And for me, it was the sugar-free part of that made me start using it quite some time ago. Beyond having the electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. And if you look at the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology knowledge that is baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. I am a devotee of their product. I really do use them. I know people will say that on these ad reads. I use it every single day for my workout. I put it in my protein shakes afterwards. I do use it. Also, by the way, Element has just recently brought back the chocolate medley range, which you can have essentially your electrolytes hot. And in the trio of flavors, there is chocolate mint, chocolate chai, and also my favorite, chocolate raspberry. And by the way, I happily badgered them to agree to give you fine folks a free sample pack with any purchase of Element if you just use the link lmnt.com/Matt Walker. That's lmnt.com/Matt Walker. Let's just cut to the chase. Let's focus on the critical group number 3. That group was the group that most closely mimics the sleep patterns of many of us in society. So let's start with exactly what sleep they were getting and how much debt that they had accumulated. Group number 3 lost a total of 12 hours of sleep across that essentially working week of 5 days. And over the weekend, they managed to recover of that 12 hours of accumulated sleep debt, only 3 hours. So in other words, they were only able to get back 25% of all of the sleep debt that they'd built up during the week. And what this demonstrated to us is that even though, yes, your system is desperately hungry for sleep by the weekend, it knows it's carrying a debt, it still is unable to wipe that debt clean and clear at the weekend because the sleep rebound recovery system can only get back about 25% of all of the sleep debt that you've accumulated, based on this study at least. So in other words, sleep in this fashion just isn't like the bank. You can't fully pay off the accumulated debt on the sleep books. In other words, they entered the next working week still carrying 9 hours of sleep debt. And so if someone you could imagine in society is just repeating that time and time again, even if they are so diligent at the weekend to always try to get as much sleep as they want and they can generate that debt of 9 hours going into the next week, and then that debt then accumulates to another 18 hours by week 2, and you can just see how it's like compounding interest on a loan. It's not a linear escalation in sleep debt, it's an exponential. But that wasn't the key finding, to my mind at least. And by the way, this is not the new finding, which I promise you, it's going to be more positive. I shouldn't be called @sleepdiplomat on social media channels. It should be called @doom and gloom. But anyway, what was even more concerning was that the quality of the sleep that they were getting in that critical group number 3 was not great, because you could imagine that maybe they just get 3 hours of extra sleep at the weekend. But what if it was clearly just turbocharged, high octane, super quality deep sleep? In other words, it was almost like 12 hours of deep sleep packed into just 3 hours. And they were able to assess that hypothesis by deconstructing the brainwaves during that weekend recovery sleep in group 3. And with hope, they were looking to see an extra special high quality of deep electrical brainwave activity, and the participants weren't able to generate it. They were not able to clear the amount of deep sleep electrical brainwave debt. They couldn't generate that same amount of slow, deep brainwave activity. So what that tells us is that as you're going in to try to clear off that debt at the weekend, not only will you not clear all of that debt, or even half of it, only clearing 25% of it, that 25% of recovery sleep doesn't lend itself well to deep restorative electrical brainwave activity. By the way, what they'd also found was that the circadian rhythms, the melatonin release rhythms, were highly dysregulated at the weekend. And all of a sudden, when they came back to start the working week next week, having done this big shift at the weekend to going to bed, or at least sleeping in much later, the circadian rhythm was confused, the melatonin signaling was disrupted. But to me, the main outcome of the study were the consequences. Because let's say that they just got back 25% of all of the sleep debt that they'd accumulated. They just got 3 hours back of the 12 hours. We don't really care if they only got back 25% if that 25% of recovery extra sleep at the weekend was able to wipe away 80, 90, 100% of all of the deficits in the brain and the body that had accumulated across the working week. Because really, we don't care about the amount of sleep debt on the books. It's really about the consequence of that debt. And if just getting an extra 25% of sleep at the weekend is enough to clear away, not the sleep debt itself, you've still got 75% of that left, but at least clear away a disproportionate amount of the harm that you've been carrying across the week by the end of the weekend, then that's great. We don't care about the degree of sleep debt. We just care about how much better off you are by having slept longer at the weekend. A partner of today's podcast is Shopify. Why Shopify? As someone who spends his days researching sleep and his nights researching sleep, the idea of selling merchandise was quite daunting. And you're probably thinking, what on earth is he going to be selling? We're going to start with some exciting t-shirts, all with the proceedings going directly to a new sleep education nonprofit charity that I will announce later. At the moment that we started to do that, I knew what I wanted to design, but how on earth was I going to get this sleep merch into your fantastic hands? Everyone who gave me answers gave me the same answer, Shopify, and it turned out to be remarkably simple. Without any retail experience, I was able to set up and activate my store effortlessly. Shopify's point of sale system, it's really interesting. It basically just integrates perfectly with all of the different online sales components, and it just manages everything so smoothly. Honestly, it was great. Shopify POS, it handles all the complexities of sales, inventory, and it just lets me focus on my passion, which is sleep science. Try it out. You'll see what I mean about its intuitive platform. Oh, you should also note that Shopify isn't just for online businesses. I've heard, at least from one friend in particular, it really can help revolutionize in-person sales as well. It's one system that seems to integrate everything. If you would like an offer, here is the offer. Shopify have agreed to do a $1 per month trial. It's just $1 a month if you do shopify.com/Matt Walker. So again, shopify.com/Matt Walker. You'll get Shopify for $1 a month. That's nuts. I don't know why they're doing this for me, but it's great. Okay, let's get back to the show. Sadly, what they found was that, again, that recovery sleep was not sufficient to clear away the sickness and disease signatures in the brain caused by short sleeping during the week. Because that group number 3, the people who were short sleeping during the week, even though they were getting recovery sleep at the weekend, on average, they were still consuming somewhere between 4 to almost over 600 extra calories per day, which, if you kind of project it out, this can be pounds of weight that are starting to add due to this overconsumption. What they found was that when that overconsumption was happening in this cycle of the experiment was, not surprisingly, especially during those weekdays. And here, it wasn't as though the participants were necessarily eating vast amounts more at each one of the meals. It was that the participants just kept snacking both before dinner and also after dinner. That's where the pounds and the calories were packed on. So once again, the weekend recovery sleep was not able to excise the caloric intake increase and thus the weight gain. Finally, those participants in that group 3 condition, they were short sleeping during the week, long sleeping at the weekend, they struggled to regulate their blood sugar levels. Their insulin sensitivity, in other words, how sensitive the body was to the signal of insulin to say, hey, we've got food on board, it's time to absorb all of that glucose, all of that blood sugar, so that we don't get a nasty spike. The sensitivity, the body sensitivity to listening to the cry out of insulin to say it's time to absorb blood glucose was impaired. Even after the weekend of recovery, even after that additional 3 hours of sleep, they were still no longer blood sugar normative. They were being set on a path towards type 2 diabetes, despite the recovery sleep. So I think in summary, that study, which is, I think, has been one of the best out there, most comprehensive, shows that weekend catch-up sleep does not fully reverse the damage caused by weekday sleep deprivation. The sleep debt accumulates, your circadian rhythms are still disrupted despite the weekend catch-up sleep, appetite and weight gain both increase, blood sugar regulation deteriorates. And so that common practice of short sleep during the working week and then trying to compensate at the weekend did not seem to be an effective strategy for maintaining all of those different aspects of health and wellness that the study had measured. In other words, the amount of sleep that you were able to get back, your circadian rhythm and your melatonin rhythms, your appetite, your weight gain, your blood sugar. Those were all of the things that study measured. But what that study didn't measure were aspects of your cardiovascular system. What if, perhaps, yes, those systems all start to fail despite the catch-up sleep? Maybe other systems are at least salvaged to some degree by sleep extension at the weekend. And that is where we pivot to this very new, exciting study that just came out, as I said, just a few weeks ago as of recording this. As I've mentioned on this show before, I am a bit of a health fiend, fanatic, I suppose you could call it. The biggest challenge for me, my one kryptonite, is baked goods, especially bread. Oh, I'm a sucker for bread. But the carb count really has kept me away for probably over a decade. A few years ago, I was searching out the possibility of zero net carb breads. And that is when I found my salvation. It was Hero Bread. I have been addicted to them. guilt-free because they are zero net carb and have been just righteously consuming their product for probably well over 3 years now. And they reached out and asked if I would consider them as being a sponsor of the show. Couldn't believe it. And my go-to is the white bread loaf. And the way I typically do it, I have 2 slices topped with blanched tomatoes, drizzled in balsamic, and then I sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan cheese on top. Oh my goodness, it's laughable how happy it makes me. And as I mentioned, it's not just zero net carbs. It is 0 grams of sugar. It is very high in fiber, superb taste. It's kind of like fluffy texture. It's just hard to believe. You have to try it for yourself, or you don't. It's entirely up to you. I would highly recommend that you do. And if a loaf is not your thing, they've got all sorts of things. They've got tortillas, they've got wraps, they've got tacos, they've got bagels, they've got dinner rolls, you name it. If you are looking for a bread that supports your health goals without sacrificing the taste and the texture, I would recommend Hero Bread. You can get 10% off your order. Just go to hero.co and then use the promotion code Matt Walker, all one word. So that is hero.co and then use the promo code Matt Walker. In other words, HERO.co, and then just insert the promo code Matt Walker, all one word, and you will get 10% off your purchase. And this study was really looking at a different body measure outcome. And that, as I mentioned, was heart disease risk. And there is some really good news here, albeit with caveats, of course. The research was presented at a conference just a few weeks ago, and the study presented data from almost 91,000 participants from something called the UK Biobank Project. And the goal of the researchers was to investigate the relationship between weekend catch-up sleep and heart disease risk. The study grouped participants into quartiles based on the amount of compensatory sleep they received on the weekends. Here's the findings. The key finding was that those in the quartile with the most amount of compensatory sleep at the weekend were 19% less likely to develop heart disease compared to those in the lowest quartile who obtained the least amount of compensatory sleep. For participants who experienced sleep deprivation during the week, so in other words, they were able to say not just how much additional compensatory sleep did you get at the weekend, but a different way of looking at it would be to say, how sleep deprived, how short slept are you during the week? And how much does that additional compensatory sleep benefit provide? What it found was that those who experienced some of the greatest amounts of sleep loss at the weekend showed the greatest risk reduction in heart disease if they were getting plentiful compensatory sleep at the weekend. In fact, it was greater than 20%. So what's good news there is that you could imagine the people who are coming in to the weekend with the most severe sleep debt are unfortunately the individuals who do not respond to even vast amounts of compensatory sleep at the weekend. That would be really quite sad news because they're the people who need it the most. And what the study demonstrates is that those people who need it the most got the greatest benefit of it, at least for heart disease risk. And I actually think this is a significant finding because it suggests that weekend catch-up sleep can, for very select functional or physiological systems in the body, here we're talking about the cardiovascular system, can have a positive impact on your trajectory of cardiovascular health. And that seems to be especially true for those who are sleep deprived, most sleep deprived during the week. It's a glimmer of hope, at least for heart health, that you can potentially mitigate some of the dangers of the stresses of the working week, of the pressures of the working week, of the pressures of family life and obligations, all of which just squeeze the amount of sleep that you can get during the week like vice grips in the middle of the night, making it so short. Well, here, getting that additional sleep at the weekend can at least help out your heart. And it's not so much the tragic heart disease, but there is a lessening of the heartache, let's put it that way, that you may feel, quite literally, indeed. But there's also a critical perspective here, and that critical perspective, before we get too excited, is really one of partial recovery and the fact that it's not a cure-all. Because it's crucial to consider that this finding should be viewed in the broader context of the other data that we just described earlier. And in fact, many studies like that earlier study. And it is encouraging, don't get me wrong, that weekend catch-up sleep may reduce the risk of heart disease. But we must remember that there are so many other physiological systems of your body and so many other operations of your brain that unfortunately do not seem to benefit in the same way from weekend catch-up sleep that the cardiovascular system does. Let's return to the analogy of sleep not being like the bank. If you're thinking of sleep debt as money you can pay back later, you may consider weekend catch-up sleep as paying off some of your credit card balance. Yes, you're reducing the amount that you owe, but you are not clearing that debt entirely. And in fact, you may only be paying off one of those selective credit card balance accounts, and you will be leaving many of the other credit card balances still in arrears, still in substantive debt that will lead to the escalation of compounding bad health interest on the loan, the debt that you're taking out week after week after working week. So just because you've made a payment on one of those cards doesn't mean that the interest does not keep accumulating on all of the other health issue credit cards. Those keep on accruing. So yes, we can catch up sleep. It may lower your risk of heart disease. It doesn't erase the sleep debt effects of those other body parts. Remember the study by Dr. Wright, and it showed us that brain's deep sleep mechanisms remain impaired even after recovery sleep. The circadian rhythms are still disrupted, including melatonin. Your appetite regulation is still thrown off. It's still dysregulated even with weekend catch-up sleep. Your blood sugar control is still suffering even after weekend recovery sleep. All of those things contribute to your lifespan as well as your health span. So, the news about heart disease is so welcome. I am not someone who rejoices in these concerning findings about a lack of sleep. I just want everyone to be happy and healthy and fulfilled and be imbued with equanimity. But it's also important not to be fooled by the headlines of news articles that catch-up sleep is a cure-all. We can't be fooled into thinking that weekend catch-up sleep is such a panacea for all things. It's a partial solution for some selective benefits, but it leaves other aspects of your health still unresolved. I know you're going to hate me when I say this, but honestly, in truth, the reality is that consistent, sufficient sleep, whether it's the weekday or the weekend, it's just irreplaceable. So, with all of that, thank you so much for listening. Are these podcasts where you sort of absorb and digest new findings, contrast them with the current zeitgeist and what we already know and how it all fits in, and parsing the complexities so you're not fooled by simplistic headlines and sort of the clickbait stuff? Are they helpful? Or is it just kind of hashtag too much detail? You know, you've just confused me 5 ways till Tuesday. Tell me on social media, please. And with that appeal, I bid you farewell. Thank you for listening. Take care. Get some sleep. Consistent. Bye for now. Thanks very much.